the extensions on the Panama Canal as well as in Suez Canal has been indicated sometimes as a reason not to be too much enthusiastic about what is going on up north. But as we have heard also during this Arctic Circle session here, we have heard from the Chinese presentation, they talk about new ice silk road. Perhaps since the ice is melting, we should talk about something else, the sea silk road or something like that. But this is a reflection of the interest between Asia and Europe. The Finnish Minister of Foreign Trade today mentioned that in the international trade, the global the center of gravity is between turning to between Asia and Europe. So we are really with the title of discussing the impact, not the zero impact on global trade. We are discussing that from that perspective. It is also coming from IIASA, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. We have a project discussion there on Eurasian cooperation. So that is again a relevant topic between Asia and Europe. Some 5 years ago, if you look at the predictions on the development in the Northern Sea Road, they may have been quite different what you are hearing today. So the situation in the Arctic is volatile, it's changing, and it is so much unpredictability there involved. Anyhow, even to be able to start discussing and looking at it, you need to have as much analysis and facts and assessment of the situation today as possible. And therefore, I think when you talk about this topic, you cannot talk about it really without the Russian participation. Now, in the opening session, the Russian ambassador Barbin already mentioned that the Northern Sea Road is one of the 4 priorities under the Russian Arctic policy. So that is important, as you can see it. And today, in a session, Mr. Ambrosov from Sovcomflot was explaining the usage of Northern Sea Road from oil and gas project perspective. But today we are here. Yuri Kostin from Russia, an expert who has been traveling also in the area extensively, and he will have a first keynote presentation of the Northern Sea Road today and in the future. So, and next keynote will be by Sampo Viherlehto, the chartering manager and master mariner from Arctia Limited, but the Yuri Kostin, deputy head of Federal Agency for Maritime and River Transport for Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Thank you. And of course, this road was very important for Russia. And just in the 18th century, the great Russian scientist Mikhail Lomonosov said that the Russian power will grow with Siberia and the Arctic Ocean. In 19th century, another one great Russian scientist, Admiral Stepan Makarov, said that the Russians' facade faces the north. So, for all these years, more than 400 years, the Russian interest was to open this way. It started from when wind control vessels were still in use. At this time, when wind control vessels were in use, this idea to find our own way from Russia to India wasn't found. But in 1932, the icebreaker steamer Siberikov, with the expedition of the great polar explorer Otto Schmidt, successfully sailed via the Northern Sea Road, thus providing the possibility of that. Since that, the Soviet Union and later the Russian Federation pay very much attention for the development of the Northern Sea Route. In 1932, also the main office of the Northern Sea Route was established by the Council of People's Commissar of the USSR. From this date, we are starting the history of the Northern Sea Route. Now, what we have in 2013 started to operate the Northern Sea Road Administration. Here you see the website of the Northern Sea Road Administration. Her activity is the Northern Sea Road Administration is headquartered in Moscow, arrange the shipping in the waters of the Northern Sea Road, assures navigation safety and marine environment protection against pollution from the ships. The website of the administration of the Northern Sea Road, it's simple, I think it's user-friendly, and you can easily receive the permission for the sailing via this website. It's not necessary to send some paper copies or something like this. Just fill the blank on this website, and if the vessel under its technical characteristic is able to go via the Northern Sea Road, you will receive this permission also from this website. Yes, on this side you can see the existing boundaries of the waters of the Northern Sea Roads. We know and we can easily see that the Northern Sea Road is the shortest road from the European part of Russia to the Far East, and also from Europe to the Southeast Asia. Well known fact, if you compare the time and expenses on cargo delivery, for instance, from Rotterdam to Yokohama, the transportation will be much more faster than via the Suez Canal. Today we see, I want to say, the Northern Sea Road now is going through its second birth. Traffic volume from year to year is growing. You see, last year we have more 7.5 million tons of carried cargo. I can say that to the moment, so to the end of this week, we have more than 7 million cargoes which were carried via the Northern Sea Road for not full 10 months. We hope that this year it will be around 10 million tons. And the development of Northern Sea Road, of course, may become a serious natural competitor for the Suez and Panama canals, while the states implementing projects of transcontinental transportation via Arctic roads, and they will receive from it also some economic profit. The interest of developing and using this road is determined by two essential factors. First of all, ship owners are interested in the Northern Sea Road for carriage of resources from the Arctic regions. On the other hand, the Northern Sea Road, as I told before, is economically profitable alternative for the current transportation between the ports of Europe and countries of Southeastern Asia. We have the predictions. So for 2025, we think that the volume of the cargoes transported via the Northern Sea Road can reach from 35 to 40 million tons. Here you can see the projects of the Northern Sea Road. They are present and future. So you can see the just finished project. They are marked with the green. Projects which are at the stage of construction and erection works, projects which are at the design stage, and projects which are at the concept design stage. Just now I shall say a few words concerning the main projects. So first of all, of course, this is Port of Sabeta. Sabeta Seaport, this is really the unique port. It is situated in the estuary of the river Ob. The construction of this port was started just on the empty place. It started on 2012, and the first ship had moored there already in October 2013. Supplying the port, the first cargo was delivered. This was more than 6,000 tons of general cargo, which were necessary for the construction of the port facilities and also the facilities of the LNG plant. It should be noted that all cargoes for this project were carried only by sea, only via the Northern Sea Road. No other kinds of transport wasn't used for the building of this new, well, not city, but new plant and new place for the inhabitation. Now it's 30,000 people are living there. On the end of November, we suggest that there will be the first loading of LNG carrier. The name of this LNG carrier, Christophe de Margerie. I shall show it a little later, who was this morning on the plenary session. Mr. Ambrosov, rather, well, he told about this unique vessel. So here you see Christophe de Margerie. I'll only, well, say a few words concerning the dimensions of this vessel. The ship has Arc 7 ice class, displacement 143,000, dead weight around 97,000 tons, capacity is 173 cubic meters. The length overall is 299 meters, beam 15 meters, hull height 26.5 meters, loaded draft 13 meters. The ship equipped is very good thrusters with a total power of 45 megawatts, allowing speed in the free water of around 20 knots. And Mr. Ambrosov told that in a record time it passed from Norwegian Hammerfest and from the Northern Sea Road for discharging. It was the fastest trip via the Northern Sea Road without icebreaker assistance. Also there in Sabete we have one more, also in the estuary of Riba, we have one more very serious project. This is Novoportovskaya field. This is oil. And since the first is the capacity of it is 8.5 million per the year, it was constructed in 2016, and since 1st January of 2017, 1st January of this year, we started the regular service from this port. This is the first ever project for year-round oil transportation in the conditions of the shallow waters of estuary. Under the project, cargo is shipped via the Northern Sea route by shuttle tankers with a dead weight of 40,000 tons, also with ice class Arc 7. Here are the tankers which are used for this carriage. All of them are named in honor of great Russian discoverers, of great mariners and navigators, the explorers of the Arctic. The next project, Murmansk. Murmansk is situated is not in the area of the Northern Sea Road, but Murmansk is situated in the Kola Bay, which is non-frozen, and so that's why we can name it the gate to the Arctic. And there are also a huge plans for the delivering the port infrastructure on the western part of the Kola Bay, and the total capacity of this project, the main cargoes are coal and oil, and total capacity we expect to reach around 18 million tons. Next project, it's for the future, but the nearest future. So, coal terminal Chaika, it's close to the port of Dixon. It's coal, and the capacity can reach 10 million tons. Then the project like Sabete, just on opposite bank of estuary, just opposite the Sabete port. It's also for LNG with the projected volume of 33.5 million tons. And the work there still started, so they are now made the precautionary works to make this project live. Next one, Cape Tanalao. This is the terminal also for the oil transfer. Also good project. There is, we have the cargo for it. It's around 5 million tons annually. The next one, this is port of Indiga. It's situated on the Barents Sea, not in the, also in the water area of the Northern Sea Road, but anyhow the cargoes will go to the Northern Sea Road. So we expected the cargo turnover of around 40 million tons annually. It's oil products, also LNG, containers, coal and metal. This is just the brief description of present and future projects in the Russian Arctic. But the shipping everywhere in the ocean, and especially in the Northern Sea Road, the shipping must be safe. Russian biggest shipping company Sovcomflot, which successfully operates in the Northern Sea Road, has the motto, safety comes first. And we must be absolutely sure that the navigation in the Northern Sea Road is safe. Of course, the icebreaker fleet is necessary for assurance of safe vessel navigation in the ice condition of the Northern Sea Road. To the moment, 8 line icebreakers are operated in the Northern Sea Road. 4 of them are nuclear, and 4 of them are diesel oil breakers. The next, of course, we must have the good nautical charts, especially for the high tonnage vessels. Navigational and hydrographic support in the Northern Sea Road is provided by Hydrographic Enterprise, which annually carries hydrographic works to receive new data for publishing nautical charts, guides and manuals, and maintain them current. Also, the Russian Federation, according to the international obligations, transmits navigational warnings to Navaria 20 and Navaria 21 areas in the Arctic according to safety net system using Inmarsat Sea communication satellites. The next urgent thing, search and rescue. Organization and conduction of search and rescue are provided by the Marine Rescue Coordination Centers in Dixon, Tixi and Pivek. So they're on the all distance on the Northern Sea Road. Set up and currently operating also in Dixon, Tixi, Pivek and one more port, Providenie, which is near the Bering Strait, 4 forward operating bases fitted with, as we called, first assault equipment for oil spill response. Due to increased volume of traffic, advanced ice-class rescue ships were built for Sea Rescue Service of Russian Federation to tackle the search and rescue tasks in the Arctic and Far East regions. Now I shall show you some of these new vessels. First of all, of course, this multi-purpose salvage vessel Baltica. It's the most unique vessel. I am very pleased to note that this unique vessel was built in close cooperation with our Finland partners, with Arctic Helsinki Shipyard. Experts of the Royal Society of Shipbuilding Engineers from the UK recognize the ship as the best one in its class and put her on the annual list of the best vessels built in 2014. The ship's uniqueness that she can easily move not only forward and astern, but also on the angle to the ice. So that's why moving on the angle to in the ice, the ship can clear a path up to 60 meters wide in ice up to 1.2 meters thick. Another vessels also built for Arctic region, for the Northern Sea Road. These are the rescue vessels with 7 megawatts power. We have 2 such vessels. This is Murman and Bering Strait, and also 4 vessels of 4 megawatt power. These are Спасатель Карев, Спасатель Кавдейкин, Спасатель Заборчиков, and Спасатель Демидов. All of them have very high ice classes, Icebreaker 6 or Arc 5 ice class. These vessels are currently on duty on Приразломное field, on Varandey terminal, and also on Novoportovskaya field in estuary of Ob. You see it before. The new icebreakers. We need icebreakers, as Admiral Makarov said. And in 2015 and 2016 we built new diesel icebreakers, 16 megawatts power, so they can easily be used for the summer navigation in the Northern Sea route. And the name of this icebreaker is named after the name of the Russian cities, Novorossiysk, Vladivostok and Murmansk. And under construction is also one more icebreaker with more power. The power is 25 megawatts. The name will be Viktor Chernomyrdin. We hope that we'll receive it on the end of 2018. So I can say much more, I think, but I think the time is over. So we believe that above message, both implemented and scheduled, will help to provide a high safety level of navigation in the Northern Sea route. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think this gave really a good basis for also in discussion on, but it's showing how much is taking place, and I'm sure we are very interested to see about the funding and about the situation which is behind the assessment of this very great activities there. But now we will have, before we go to our eminent panel, we will have another keynote speech by Mr. Viherjelehto, who has been also traveling there in the Northern Sea Road and coming from the Finnish perspective.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, great being here. Thanks for the Arctic Circle. A few words. I'm Sampo. I work for Arctia, and as you probably know, we are the government operator of the Finnish icebreaker fleet. We operate 8 heavy icebreakers. And our main task, of course, is to operate in the Baltic icebreaking during the winter season to keep the Finnish and Swedish ports open for the entire winter. Now, however, economically, it's sensible to have the ships doing also something more than just the Baltic icebreaking. So this is why we have 2 multi-purpose icebreakers, the Nordica and Fennica, which have been over the years working on many projects abroad. Now, I was on board Fennica when I took this picture. We were just getting along the way from Barrow, Alaska, through the NSR to Finland. All right, and let's have one more slide. No, the basis for the project is, or was, that as we would like to extend the offshore season, of course, as long as we can in the Alaska project with Shell at the time, we must, however, reach Finland for the winter icebreaking season. Now, normally it will take, as it's said here on the slide, about 50 days to go through, if we go from Europe to Alaska, the Azores, the Panama Canal, and so on. So in order to be able to stay in the project for as long as possible, we decided that we will take the Northern Sea route. It was just in the end of November, so it was pitch black and already freezing, minus 18 degrees katabatic winds, as you know. All right, so as you can see on the slide, quite a lot of saving in both time and bunker, of course. Now here you can see the NSR route that we took. In the first picture you saw Nordica, Fennica, Kalok and Aivik just departing from Barrow, and then of course we ended up there on the Wrangel Island over there to wait for our Russian colleagues. At that time, at the end of November, the Northern Sea route was already beginning to have like significant ice coverage, so we were the last ships to go through. All right, here we are at Wrangel Island waiting for Vaikac and Rosia icebreakers. That's Nordica, and we learned as we were just standing by the Wrangel Island that there's a pretty substantial polar bear population, about the densest polar bear population in the world. Apparently they ate the researchers on the island, after which we posed some extra lookouts on our ships as well to perhaps prevent that from happening on our vessels. All right, so here we are. Vaikac is behind us, and in front of us you would see the Rosia, and Nordica is the last one there. So it's a remarkable thing to come through all the way from Bering Strait to Europe in 12 days. And in addition that it was, as I said, pitch black out there, so it was like this tunnel that you suddenly pop out in Europe, so good fun. I must say that I have never been in cooperation with Russian icebreakers before, and it was really interesting to see firsthand that the language in icebreaking really is universal, because as icebreakers do, we always try to get go the path of the least resistance. If you have big hummocks or banks, we try to go around them. And it was fascinating to see that our fellows on Russia, they were doing the same turns and twists. I guess I would have done myself. So it's something to see that the countries and cultures vary, but the mode of operation stays the same. On our trip, there were not that many multi-year inclusions in there, some smaller, but the year after that, I wasn't on board at that time, but my friends told me that it was a totally different story. A lot of multi-year ice, even more thick first-year ice, so it's a testament to the fact that the ice conditions, they vary significantly from year to year. And as was mentioned by our colleague just a few minutes ago, the interesting for navigation-wise, of course, was the chart material. As you probably know, our ships are ENC ships, so we use the electronic navigation primarily. Unfortunately, no cells or ENC material was available at that time to the NSR. Of course, we have paper charts as backups, and we ordered as many Russian charts as we were able to find. But that is something that from our point of view was a concern, you might say, that we wish, of course, that the chart material would be as good as possible. Every navigator wants that. So it was really nice to hear from our friend here that you are exactly doing surveying the sea floor, so that's a great thing. Communications were pretty much okay. We had a couple of days without the C-band at Severna and Zemlya Islands region. It is, of course, a tragic thing if you are without your Facebook for 2 days, but we managed it. No harm done. Of course, you have your Iridium contacts during that time. All right, so here's Nordica, and she's the sister ship of Fenica. 21 megawatt icebreakers, 26 meters in breadth. We have been engaged in many offshore operations, and of course we wish to have more cooperation in future in the NSR, and also, you know, the Far East regions of Russia, as well, of course, in the West with our friends in Alaska and Canadian Arctic. All right, but that's all from me, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Now we have had both a presentation on what is available, what is going on, and then personal experiences, what is to be go through this Northern Sea Road. But now let's go to our very eminent panel here. We will hear the 5 views on this subject. After that, we will have a discussion. I've asked these views because these experts certainly would have a lot to say, and so to save time here, to limit about 5 minutes the presentation, they probably have larger presentations which they have promised to have available for us, but then to save time also for discussion, and I'm sure you might have some questions and discussions for us. So we go from there. And first one, I'm very happy to invite here Dr. Elena Rovenskaya from IIASA. The doctor, she's the program director for advanced systems analysis in IIASA in Austria, and she will talk about the subject here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure indeed to be here. I have to now change this. Unlike previous 3 gentlemen, I have never traveled along Northern Sea route, but I want to. And this is why I'm very much interested in this project, because I hope that maybe if this transportation corridor develops, then we can travel along it much easier than it is now, and then it would be, not such a big deal to do so. And that's kind of my personal interest in this. But the institute that I'm representing here, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, has a strategic interest in this topic. Those of you who attended sessions early in the morning maybe heard about the presentation that our director, Professor Pavel Kabat, gave about our institute, but I just summarize it here very quickly. This place that for short we call IIASA was established in 1972, so during the Cold War time, with the USA and USSR as co-founders of it. And the idea was to have a place as a bridge between East and West where so-called science diplomacy could be implemented, so where scientists could work together on projects. Just as the previous speaker was saying, so when you work together, you really realize that the divides are in fact much smaller than they may seem. Yeah. So this is exactly was the idea behind that institute at that time. But of course, since then it has evolved and developed, and now we have an international, independent, interdisciplinary research institution that works on major global problems, such as, for example, they range from issues of energy, land use, climate change, air quality, and so on and so forth. They're listed here on this slide. So we are trying to provide options for solutions where integrated systems analysis is required. Yeah? So this means that we are bringing complex issues together. We are looking for synergies and trade-offs beyond the kind of more traditional and established research practices. Currently we have 24 member countries. You can see the flags there, and that in fact explains our interest to the topic. As you can see, many countries, many Arctic countries, and also countries that have interest in the Arctic, that of course are many more, they are members of our institute, and this is why, so they sort of encourage us to look into these complex issues. So they believe that IIASA is exactly the right place due to its independence and experience in modeling and analysis of complex systems. Actually is a right place to address different issues that the Arctic is facing. So that explains why we wanted to organize this session, because one of the issues, obviously a very complex issue in the Arctic, is the future of the Northern Sea route, and maybe even the navigation at large. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be just that part of the Arctic Ocean. We can also speak about the Arctic Ocean as a whole. Yeah. So, nobody would disagree, I believe, that sustainable futures of the Arctic require this systems analysis approach, which means that we have to combine these different dimensions from geopolitical to economic to environmental to demographic ones, and that's again all the dimensions that are represented in IIASA's research. And here comes this more particular question that, as I said, we have come up with. Can the transport infrastructure be a driver for economic development? And if so, how this should be organized? Is there a realistic future for commercial use of the Northern Sea route in the near future? So we already saw very impressive examples of how it's used, but it's in a very exploratory fashion. Yeah? So it's very far from, obviously at this moment, it's very far from any commercial use, but is there a future for that? And if yes, then when? You all know that. I just summarize here basic, major pros and cons that we have in that question. Very obvious argument, of course, that Northern Sea route saves travel time and therefore a lot of costs for fuel and labor, of course. Some other routes, the more conventional routes like Suez Canal, are associated with higher and higher costs, as we know, due to pirates and terrorist attacks. Melting ice, of course, due to climate change is another obvious reason why now a lot of attention is turning towards the Northern Sea route. Growing demands, in particular in Asia, will require, of course, higher trade flows. And as we know, about 80% currently worldwide trade is carried by the maritime transport. So more transportation will be required. New technologies, as we just saw, are becoming more and more available. Here I give just some examples of the picture up there is the new icebreaker Arctica. And Sabeta port, we also heard about it a lot today already. Higher fragmentation of production, so longer supply chains, globalization of trade in general, again, speaks for the need of more transportation corridors in future. And maybe very practical, certainly last but not least, argument here among those is more extraction of oil and gas in Russia, and of course it has to be transported abroad. This is certainly not a complete list. You can come up with more arguments, but already those ones are quite convincing. So when you read about it, and then you think, well, why isn't it already been used? So why not? And of course, there are a lot of arguments on the other side as well. Yeah. So the shortness of navigation season again is the obvious one. Perhaps it will change in future, but a lot of uncertainty is involved in this forecast. Despite there are no pirates up north, there are other risks and various sorts of risks as well. And again, the comparison of these risks is something that is very difficult to do with certainty. At this moment, again, a very practical thing is the lack of infrastructure. Despite some developments that are happening now, still it's not enough for sure, and appropriate vessels are needed to go through the ice. Now the relatively recent effects that we can now all see also in the statistics that Yuri was showing, that how dramatically this amount of transportation depends on the fuel price. So the drop in the oil price a few years ago led to quite a drop also in the amount of transported goods along the Northern Sea route. So again, a lot of uncertainty how this will develop, and obviously all the scenarios will be based on that. And finally, some perhaps less sort of conventional arguments, more futuristics if you wish. So the development of Industry 4.0 or digitalization of production, 3D printing, for example, if we can then print different products, then maybe we don't need the transportation, or at least partly. Yeah. So all those things also are part of the equation here. All right, so all these arguments, of course, make this question exactly appropriate for what we call systems analysis. So for the analysis that requires bringing together all these different aspects, and especially focusing and sort of not denying, but including all the uncertainties that are associated with these factors. So here is our question. So can we come up with a comprehensive socioeconomic environment assessment of futures of shipping in the Arctic Ocean to support investment decisions that are being taken right now? Yeah, so all these projects are very long term. So investments may happen now, and the effects, of course, will happen later. So can we come up with a solid scientific basis for these futures, and to whom? So who should benefit from this? So who would like to use these results? Yeah. So that is our question on the table at this moment. So we have some ideas, of course, how to do that. Typical IIASA approach would be come up with so-called narratives or qualitative scenarios that are informed by modeling. This is why we actually invited, so the speakers which will be speaking after me, they have done a lot on this already, and we invited them in order to discuss with them how they see that. From our perspective, certainly one needs to look into different stakeholders here and what their interests are and how their interests actually drive this sector. So this should certainly be part of any modeling exercise. One has to take into account various drivers. We mentioned them already, and again, I'm even highlighted here. So one has to really look into uncertainty. One has to take into account uncertainties that are associated with that. And of course, it's easy to say, but there are methods to do that. And in this particular question, I think it's really, really essential. In terms of modeling, we are thinking of combination of bottom-up and top-down modeling approaches. This means that one has to analyze plausible technology options that are available, their costs and what they can yield, and combine it with trade models and see how the scenarios are developing in this way. And again, I'm emphasizing here that one really needs to design so-called robust solutions. So one has to include the uncertainties and be able to give some recommendations that are robust with respect to these various sorts of uncertainties. And for this, we have been developing particular mathematical tools and methods at IIASA. I give a reference here. And this is quite advanced, so one can benefit from those. All right. So I suggest that this session really aims at this, at discussing how can we co-design, together with you who are interested, the future research in order to make it useful for decisions that are made by stakeholders, at the same time ensuring that the sustainability in the Arctic is not compromised. So let us discuss this. And now there will be 4 speakers speaking after me, each of which, as I said already, in fact conducted very impressive research along these lines. So we would like to learn from them and then have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jelena. There is a lot of food for thought, both of the panelists, but and for you there are really crucial questions what we want to deliver. So keep this in mind, and we come back to that in our discussions. And the next speaker is Dr. Natsuhiko Otsuka, professor at the Hokkaido University Arctic Research Center in Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Otsuka from Hokkaido, Japan, and today I'd like to touch on more actual issues. One of the ideas or examples to discuss or consider the liner shipping, whether the liner shipping is feasible when we consider to use the Northern Sea route. Yes. So it is widely pointed out by many experts about the issues about the feasibility of Northern Sea route, and I have been investigating ship activities and sea ice conditions along the Northern Sea route for many years. And here's the topics of my talk today. So about the issues of NSR liner shipping, and what about the navigability, and how the NSR liner service is feasible or not, economically feasible, or how about the punctuality. And finally, as a conclusion, to discuss with perspectives of liner shipping in the future. And here's some major issues of the liner services of the Northern Sea route, but so these are already discussed. Maybe navigable season is limited, difficulty of navigation in ice-infested waters, or uncertainty of sea ice, or uncertain punctuality, poor search and rescue infrastructures and communication systems, lack of ice-class ships, and uncertainty of risk characteristics, and so on and so on. And so I started this kind of research by monitoring actual vessel activities and sea ice conditions, and investigating navigability, safety and risk of Arctic shipping, and then investigating the shipping cost, whether it's feasible or not, to compare with the actual liner services using Suez Canal route. And here you can see the animation on your left-hand side. This figure shows the ice concentration and ship movement in 2004 seasons. And the circle is shows the ship movement, and the color of circle shows the ship speed. So if there's no ice, the circle of color becomes red, orange or red, it means that the ships are navigating at the speed of 12 knots or faster. And using these informations and analyzing sea ice conditions, then I can estimate the relationship between ship speed and navigable ship speed and ice condition. And using this information, one of the estimation whether ship can navigate through the northern sea at what speed. And as a result, using 2014 ice conditions, ship would be able to navigate at the speed of 9 knots to 15 knots from July to November. And using this result, I can calculate the shipping cost when we use the Arctic Northern Sea route for liner shipping. And in this scenario, I propose the Northern Sea route and Suez Canal route combined scenario. This scenario uses Northern Sea route only in summer. And in winter, the same ships are navigating through the Suez Canal. And how the total shipping cost becomes compared to the existing Suez Canal routes. And this scenario calls at 3 ports in Asia and only 3 ports in Europe. And this scenario is considering quick delivery. So ships are expected to navigate 49 days for one loop from maybe the halfway is 24 and a half days. And considering, so based on the calculation result of ship speed, I can calculate the shipping cost due to the ice condition. And the figure on your left shows the navigable speed in NSR in blue bar, and the orange bar is outer NSR area. The ship speed in NSR differs due to these sea ice conditions. For example, in the early July and late November, the ship speed in Northern Sea route is slowed, so ships must speed up in the outer NSR areas to keep the weekly service or 49 days loop of service. And in this scenario, by 49 days loop means we need 7 ice class ships. And in this scenario, I proposed 4,000 TEU ice class ships to operate weekly. And the figure, this chart in the bottom shows the operational patterns, and this orange shows the ships calls at Shanghai. Then blue bar shows the Northern Sea route times, and green bar shows the ship calls at Felixstowe and about 24 and a half days. And from one loop from Shanghai to Shanghai takes 49 days. And what about the cost is? As a result, the combined shipping scenario, the shipping cost is comparable to the Suez Canal route by using 8,000 TEU class container ships. So it's really challenging result, because the half of the size of the ships, the shipping cost is comparable with larger one. However, in recent days, the trunk route, so-called trunk route between Asia and Europe uses much more larger one, and the shipping cost is much more cheaper. So in this regard, the Northern Sea route liner shipping is not capable or is not comparable to the existing shipping route using Suez Canal. However, the important thing is the Northern Sea route can ship cargoes really faster than the existing route. It means that maybe the cargoes that require the fast, quick delivery would be a key factor for the shipping market. So here's a perspective of the NSR liner services using NSR liner services. So as a result, ship can sail the NSR at the speed of 10 to 15 knots in summer. This means that the 49 days of quick delivery services, weekly services. However, this model cannot comparable to the existing Suez Canal route in terms of shipping cost. But the demand could be so if we utilize the Northern Sea route for using container shipping, maybe demand could be cargoes of high time dependent cost and those that require quick delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Otsuka. I'm sure that Yuri has taken careful note on this and then come back to these comments. But I think the perspectives of liner shipping are really vital for feasibility of commercial transport between Asia and Europe. And in this field, I feel that I would like to call next to Dr. Liisa Kauppila to talk about particularly in line of this question of the relations between Asia and Europe. You have the floor.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liisa Kauppila. I'm a doctoral candidate from the University of Turku, southern part of Finland. I have my background in politics and history, East Asian studies, and future studies. Okay, so my presentation will be divided in 3 parts. First, I'll discuss the current situation, the opening of the Northern Sea route, and the rise of China. Then I'll present my suggestion, how to understand these 2 major forces in a comprehensive way. Finally, I'll take up some ideas, how China-Arctic maritime and energy systems shape the futures of global trade and economy. So, there are 2 major trends that are currently shaping the futures of global trade. The Northern Sea route is gradually opening as an alternative trade route, as many of us have already discussed. And at the same time, China's rise is reshaping the global economy. China is the world's most populous country. Almost every 1/5 of the world's consumers is Chinese. It's also the world's 2nd largest economy and the biggest trading nation. So because of China's demographic and economic power, the needs and creeds of Chinese people dictate a large share of global trade flows. What China chooses to export and import, and which routes it chooses to use, has a huge impact on global economy and the future of us all. So basically, global trade is increasingly intertwined with the performance and development of the Chinese economy. But what is more, these 2 trends are not only game-changing, they're also mutually restorative developments. Without Chinese existing and prospective investments, we would not be talking about a full-scale opening of the Northern Sea routes. The fact that Chinese companies and the central government are demonstrating long-term commitment to developing the Ice Silk Road in the context of the country's One Belt, One Road strategy has an enormous impact on the future prospects of the route. Already now, Chinese investment and participation has been crucial in realizing the pioneering Arctic LNG project in Yamal. Furthermore, China's biggest shipping company, COSCOS, is keeping the hopes up for frequent use of the Northern Sea route in cargo shipping with its brave visions. But also the opening of the Northern Sea route is advancing China's rise. Different Chinese economic actors are utilizing the Northern Sea route in tackling the challenges that they are now facing. The central government must secure the energy supply of the growing Chinese middle class and complement the country's energy portfolio with more green alternatives, which is what the Arctic LNG represents for a country whose economic growth has been mainly fueled with coal burning. Security of energy transportation is of crucial importance in this equation, just as well as learning the navigational and technological skills that sailing on the Northern Sea route takes. And meeting these goals in a successful manner are questions of life and death for the ruling party, the CCP. Furthermore, the Chinese economy is undergoing a great transformation from being the world's factory towards becoming an innovation economy. The value of the Northern Sea route as a corridor of high-tech learning is fully recognized in China. What the Chinese companies learn in the High North on the Northern Sea route can be highly applicable elsewhere as well. And it's not only the central government that is facing the new challenges in the current situation. Unlike in the past, Chinese state-owned energy companies are under an increasing pressure to make profit. In their urge to do so, they must find new arenas for business, which is what the Northern Sea route, the High North, offers. Finally, the Northern Sea route may also provide new economic opportunities for northeastern Chinese local governments. Especially the landlocked Jilin province is hoping to make use of the opening sea route and improve its strategic location vis-à-vis international trade routes. It has made harbor lease agreements with Russia's Tsarobino and North Korea's Rason port and is now aiming to develop the cross-border region into a major hub for the Northern Sea route. So, how does that all come together? I'm suggesting that the High North is actually becoming a scene of China-Arctic maritime and energy systems, with far-fetching implications for the global economy and trade. What are these China-Arctic maritime systems? I think they're best described as functional regions, distinct spaces of flows. In practice, they are complex networks along whose linkages of Chinese capital flows to the Arctic, energy flows to China, and high-tech expertise and navigational and energy transportation related know-how flows from the involved companies to China. And the origin of this expertise and know-how may equally be Japanese, South Korean, or French, as is the case in Yamal LNG project. This map presents the first China-Arctic maritime system, which is emerging in the context of Yamal LNG project. So we see the investment flowing from China, LNG production expertise from France and Japan, shipbuilding know-how from South Korea's Daewoo, LNG transportation knowledge, which China was lacking, from Japanese Mitsui OSK lines, and energy from northern Siberia to the Chinese markets. And in the future, there might be many more functional regions of this type. They might be emerging in the context of the new energy projects in Russia, but also another functional region may soon emerge with Chinese and Alaskan towns as its hubs. Which takes me to my conclusion. What are the implications of these systems for the futures of global trade? What the Chinese gain and learn through interaction in these processes play a significant role in the ongoing transformation of Chinese economy, whose success in turn defines the futures of global economy and trade. But they may also lead to an increased Chinese self-sufficiency. As a result of all teaching and learning, the Chinese are likely to become less dependent on foreign collaboration in industries that support trade. And self-sufficiency has been the aim in Chinese energy demand and energy application for years. And finally, I believe the emergence of these functional regions that cut across the traditional borders of the Arctic and East Asia may change the way we talk about global trade regions in the future. Instead of the Arctic and East Asia, it might become very justified to talk about the Asian Arctic, just like we talk about Asia Pacific. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So there was a confirmation of the discussion of the new ice silk road or sea silk road, as we heard. It's very, very interesting. Now we have a next speaker is well known to all of you, Dr. Lawson Brigham. He's a distinguished fellow faculty member at the International Arctic Research Center of University of Alaska Fairbanks, and most of us know him, of course, from AMSA report, which is very much thanks to to blossom here. You have the floor, Lars.
I only have a couple slides. I have a longer presentation. I'll provide the leadership here and our chair. But I wanted to kind of hone in on some questions for the project that is being envisioned. In the IIASA, I can give you an anecdote. A distinguished diplomat at one of the briefings of IIASA at the senior Arctic official meeting asked a direct question. And he said, I was a former captain in the U.S. Coast Guard, says, Captain Brigham, all I want to know is the number of ships in 2022 through Bering Strait. And the actual number. I said, if I knew that, sorry to tell you, Ambassador, I wouldn't tell you, because I would be some great god and know all of these answers. Impossible to tell the number of ships in 2050 or 2030. Why? Because Arctic trade, Arctic navigation is related to global commodities markets. The Northern Sea Route, as presented today, is related to natural resource development and taking stuff out of the Russian Arctic, in this case, to global markets. It's not about retooling the global trade routes. Why? The place is ice covered. 9.5 months out of the year. The ice is thinner, there's less extent, the character of the ice has changed. It's still ice covered. And the ice cover does limit, I mean, you can put 3 nuclear icebreakers and escort 1 ship, of course. Easily do it, maybe in the dead of winter. Is it economic? Of course not. Is it plausibly economic? Maybe not. So the plausibility of economics. I think this project is all about natural resource, the influence of global commodities on Arctic navigation, and it's also about plausibility of Arctic navigation, the economic plausibility. I've been to China many times. I was in Singapore, and we had a conference, and 6 distinguished geographers stood up, and they showed roughly 20 maps of the Arctic. And so I'm a professor of geography at Alaska. And at the end of the presentations, I had to mention that there was one thing missing in all of the maps, and it was sea ice. All of the maps had global trade routes and no sea ice. The practical issue is, of course, the place is ice covered. It is not ice free. The complexity of this issue, why we conducted scenarios analysis in the IIASA, was to express to our clients, our customers, the diplomats, the huge complexity. And President of IIASA this morning said complexity is the issue. Complexity issue is here in only one sector. And here are some issues. We had 130 in our scenarios work in the IIASA. And here are the 20 kind of heavy hitters, the most significant issues. And you can see them: legal, climate, new players in the Arctic. But the most significant of the 130 of these issues was oil prices. We started the IIASA, and the price of oil was $149 a barrel. At the end of the IIASA, 6 years later, of course, it was down to 55 or 60, and today it was 40-something. So that one factor has a lot to do with what's called Arctic shipping, although in the Arctic Council we call this Arctic shipping, which majority of people think is a container ship or maybe a tanker, and I might think it's a cruise ship or a fishing vessel. So it's marine operations in Arctic shipping is what we call it. So even defining, what are we talking about? I mean, Arctic shipping, I think to 99% of the people in this building at this conference is liner trade and the new, avoiding the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago, and it proclaimed that the Panama Canal is doing great increases of numbers of ships. Where are they headed? East coast of the United States. So, and they were actually teasing off the numbers from the Suez Canal. So the Suez and the Panama Canal are here to stay, and they are the global trade maritime routes on the planet. How the Northern Sea Route integrates with that on a seasonal basis is one of the challenges, I think. And let me see here if I can get... we did this scenarios process to tease out what are the real drivers, and we have this kind of iconic graphic of scenario, plausible scenarios, and we found that really governance and the continuum of governance, whether you have pole code or not, freelance in the Arctic Ocean, no unclose, but we do have unclose, and it was crossed with natural resource development to see what kind of pictures, plausible futures we could paint. But let me move on to some key issues of what I see that might relate to this project in Austria. Hugely complex, multiple drivers, many uncertainties, which make this down at the bottom of all of the issues atop, Arctic shipping, is just a facilitator of moving, in this case, natural resources. The key factors, I think, and many others do, the economics of the global shipping enterprise, and global demand and commodities prices, including fresh water in the future, which you can ship across the planet if you want. Majority of the traffic is clearly going to be destinational in the future, and vice transarctic, which we don't know what the niche might be, but you know, the previous analysis showed that there may be some niche markets in the summertime, but you have to do 9 to 15 knots of speed to shorten the distance. So majority of the independently operated icebreaking carriers, the Christopher de Morges this summer operated independently. Future of navigation. Nobody wants to use icebreakers unless you have to. They're expensive, right? So independently operated, specialized polar class ships, advanced icebreaking ships that can operate maybe not year-round in the Arctic, but they can westbound from Sabetta, of course, but eastbound, perhaps 6 or 7 months, we'll have to see, under escort of Russian icebreakers. Clearly, we'll see greater marine access throughout the whole of the Arctic Ocean through the century. The question is, and I think this is part of this project, how do you quantify that? And you have to use, what kind of machine are you using? What kind of polar class ship? What kind of ice do you see? What's the length of the navigation season? All the conferences I've been to in the last couple decades that relate to Arctic navigation, I ask the question, what's the length of the navigation season? And I get, a lot of times, 12 months. Oh yeah, but what's the length of the navigation season that's economically viable? That's the real question, I think. Shorter distances by geography just drives me a little crazy when you look at the maps. Sure, it's a shorter distance, but it's ship speeds, which is the central issue. How fast can you go with the vagaries of weather, ice, whatever in the Arctic Ocean? The place, again, is not ice-free. May have icing, may have wind, may be a whole host of issues that may limit the ship speed, which kind of destroys your notion of a shorter distance. IMO Polar Code enforcement by our Russian colleagues and the Arctic states is a huge issue. And then finally, the marine infrastructure gap remains, although Russia's making much headway. Some project issues that I think that focus in on exactly what you might do. Right at the top has to be, what's the length of the navigation season? 12 months in a destinational mode, maybe, from Sabetta east into the Pacific. What's that length of navigation season with or without icebreaker support? And Russian colleagues are working on that issue, but I think it's something that could be looked at. Pace of the marine infrastructure development, implementation and enforcement of the Polar Code, and the new Polar Code 2, so to speak, with black carbon, heavy fuel oil, emissions control zone. All of these issues will affect the Northern Sea route. But I think one of the central economic issues is the impact of global commodity prices and markets on natural resource development and the development of the Russian Arctic. And then finally, this issue of independently operated polar class carriers, vice icebreaker escort and convoy. So I think these are some issues and questions that may be helpful to the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very good presentation. And finally, last presentation by Dr. Dmitry Yumashev, Senior Research Associate based in the Pentland Center for Sustainability of Business, Lancaster University.
On the long-term future of the NSR, potentially, and particularly focusing on the economic gains versus losses from the climatic feedback that the route might cause due to the various redistribution of emissions. So this work was performed as part of the European Ice Arc project. It's a large 12 million consortium. It's coming to an end now. This part of work was led by Ars Lancaster University Penland Center and also the economic consultancy company Economies in the Netherlands. Right, this work has just been published in the Climatic Change Journal. There are extensive supplementary materials as well attached, so for any details of the methodologies, there are a lot of layers in that sort of cake there. Please check that out if you would like to get further answers or chat to me. Just a brief outlook of the Northern Sea route, and I appreciate Lawson's comments just now. This is just the stuff that you usually see about the viability of the Northern Sea route. It's shorter distance, yes, we know that. Now, there was a study by Beckers et al., it's the World Trade Organizations recently, and the Dutch Economic Ministry came up with this figure of 5% of the world trade could be shipped through the route if it's fully navigable, and they assume 12 months navigability in 2030, which is really, absolutely unrealistic. But they done a really thorough macroeconomic modeling and the trade modeling, really amazing. So our task here was just to see how could we downscale that really a lot, pretty much to the bone, to see what is the realistic build-up of the traffic. Now, the same guys estimated that if there is a large volume of trade on the Northern Sea route, then this will generate economic gains in Europe and East Asia of the order of 0.1% of GDP there, so it's pretty good. But of course there are obviously ecological concerns, mentioned already, black carbon, particulate matter emissions, oil spills and stuff like that. So the scope of the study that we just conducted here, first of all, we'll look at long-term sea ice projections for the shipping in line with the IPCC scenarios. And here, because we work in climate policy domain, we'll look out into the end of the century, even the next century or even further. And of course, we realize that there will be a lot of changes in the US administration in the process. A lot of, maybe even Russian administration is going to change. We don't know in the meantime. But these are sort of very long-term futures. And that's the language that is used in the IPCC using the RCP scenarios or SSP scenarios for the economy. So we use that as the basis for the study, and we'll look at the climate model, see how the sea ice shrinks there, and try to sort of project that on the Northern Sea route in a certain way. And then we use the study by the guys in Copenhagen Business School recently, Hansen, and that's very similar to our Japanese colleagues' presentation as well. So it's the viability of the route from the point of view of navigation windows and investment from shipping operators point of view, which accounts for commodity fuel prices, insurance costs, building ice resilient fleet and stuff like that. So those guys, they came up with a calculation tool that allows you under different scenarios explore when would that sort of profitability condition for the Northern Sea route compared to the Suez Canal route be met. And we tweaked that model because they used certain projections which we wanted to refine for the sea ice, but also we wanted to refine them further, like the waiting times for the icebreaker convoys, the waiting times of the Suez Canal and stuff like that, and different types of ships. So we tweaked that tool quite a bit, actually. And then we combine that with this economic estimates, the upper bound from the Dutch and the Swiss team by Beckers, which is showing sort of what's the global macroeconomic push towards the NSR if it starts to become navigable. And then what we did further, and that was the main sort of commissioning of our work by our funders, is to look at the climatic implications. The IIASA project is looking at climate impacts of Arctic change on multiple scales, regionally and globally. So our task was to see, right, everybody talks about black carbon, everybody talks about CO2 savings for shorter routes and stuff like that, but we wanted to sort of make it straight. What are all the components possibly that could contribute to this climatic effect, and is that positive or negative feedback? Is that warming or cooling the climate? Because you can hear all sorts of stuff in there. Also, I have to say that the Hansen work, the Copenhagen Business School, it included the slow steaming, included all those realistic sort of operational regime, which we again expanded. We introduced something called different navigability windows with different levels of certainty in the center of the season and towards the end of the season when you have a lot more ice floating. We also introduced 2 different routes for different sizes of the ships. So we tweaked all those results quite a bit, and then what we did then, we used a tool called an integrated assessment model, again very criticizable in multiple circles, but that's the best thing we have to translate these emissions of multiple kinds, CO2, short-lived pollutants, whatever, into climate costs, because the ultimate goal what we discovered here is that there is a net positive feedback from the Northern Sea route if it ever becomes operational. And then we need to weigh those climatic costs against the macroeconomic benefits in the countries who, in that case, will benefit from the trade. So that was the main sort of what our sponsors asked us to do, the main goal of the study. And of course, we looked briefly at the policy implications, of course, if all that stuff happens, which we are not obviously sure about. So these are a couple of results that we got. We considered two contrasting climate scenarios. On the left, you can see RCP at 0.5, so it's high emissions, a lot of sea ice lost towards the middle and the latter part of the century. And on the right, you see RCP 4.5, and that's the kind of middle of the medium emission scenario. It's sort of consistent more or less with current pledges from the Paris Agreement, current national pledges. And it hits about 3 degrees by the end of the century, of course, if we continue on that pathway. And so we just here presenting the rerouting in tons, right, the tonnage. 100% is the year-round navigability, so this is the upper bound of Dutch and Swiss guys. And you can see there are 4 ship classes, so we have 2 sizes and 2 cargo types. So we looked at container ships, right, again accounting for sort of separating commodity trade versus container ship trade between Europe and East Asia. We looked took into account long-term social economic scenarios for the economic growth in those regions. Then we downscaled the trade forecast because of this gravity, the trade between those 2 regions, and also finally we said that the bigger ships, above 2,000, I'm not going to recite those units, but the larger ships require routes further north, so they will be navigable a little bit further or quite a bit further down the line. And so we can see here, the gist of it is that you can see that there is a very, very slow build-up, and it's a 2-century time scale, so a lot of administrations will change in the process, but you've got very slow build-up, and the traffic doesn't start until 2030s or 2040s, right? And it starts with kind of non-container ships, so we got bulkers and tankers. Then containers, they start in 2050, and it's only small ships because you need bigger routes to use larger ships. And so the largest container ships, the gray wedge, right, that you're talking about in terms of profitability conditions, they only started routing towards the end of the century for the highest emission scenario. Hopefully it's not going to happen because we're not going to be around under that scenario. It's plus 5 degrees, right? And on the right, you could see that there is the traffic never reaches the capacity at all. So it only reaches about 40%, very long into the future when, say, 6 months of the year or so of the ice is disappearing, but half of the year ice still remains. So just sort of again to cool, in line with Lawson's presentation, the optimism about the benefits. But still, that traffic represents quite a bit of a trade if that happens according to those scenarios. And so that brings me to concluding parts. What is the climatic feedback of the NSR? So ship engines use heavy fuel oils, dirty fuels, high levels of various emissions, aerosols, black carbon, stuff like that. Now, emissions in the shipping sector has lagged behind the decarbonization of the economy. So emission reduction in the shipping sector is behind. That's a factor. Now, the shorter routes, so less warming because of less CO2, but less cooling because of sulfate aerosols. And of course, we account for not just the distance, but the navigation speeds on the Arctic, slow steaming, different types of fuel consumption there as well. We don't account for the fuel in the icebreakers here. We assume they're nuclear. Somebody must have built them somewhere cleanly. That's the assumption. And black carbon is again, the issue has always been discussed. So much stuff about it, but it does cause more warming in the Arctic. I mean, the thing is that half of the year the thing is black there anyway, right? So there's no sun, and the sun is very oblique. But there is a high risk, maybe up to 4 times compared to the emissions on the Southern Sea route, according to the latest atmospheric model studies from the black carbon. At least with the current level of sea ice and snow cover, and we kind of downscale that as the sea ice reduces and snow cover reduces, again in line with the IPCC scenarios. So we just downscale those projections so the black carbon effect is less, so it's more sulfates and CO2. And finally, that's something that's been overlooked most of the times, and the Dutch guys and the Swiss guys, the trade guys, but they've touched on that a little bit. There is more CO2, and also what we did further extended to non-CO2, any greenhouse gas emissions from the economies in Europe and East Asia because of the extra economic growth due to the route. You see my point? So it's not just what the shipping sector is emitting when it's rerouting, but it's the extra economic growth, because those economies are still going to be decarbonizing for the next century, right? And all those emissions have to be taken into account. So that's what we all did, right? Hold your breath. So that's the result. 2 centuries, the final slide, and that shows you the gains in the blue to the top in 8 world regions. The main regions here to look at is the big column in the center is China, right? On the very left is European Union, and then third blue column is OT. It's essentially Japan and South Korea, and these are just the regions of the page model. And these are the gains, 2 scenarios. So the bigger ones are for higher emission scenarios, and you can see the biggest benefactors. And now the red bars are the losses because of the climatic feedbacks, and because the way our model is tuned, the biggest losses because of the warming effects are in poorer regions like India and Africa. But on the whole, and that's the final slide, the final conclusion, so this climatic feedback offsets, according to our estimates, 25 to 33% of the gains globally under medium, respectively, and high emission scenarios. So basically, the higher emission scenarios, the less CIs, the more shipping, more economic gains, but the losses from the climate feedback grow proportionally stronger. And there is an inequality between gains and benefits and losses in the world between different regions. And finally, there are some policy options. They are cap on Arctic emissions, tax on CO2, black carbon. In our community, the carbon tax is a very strong issue, always discussed. We're always pushing forward with that. Ban on HFOs, slow steaming areas, LNG. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much. The problem is here that with these 7 so interesting presentations, the time is getting up, and we don't have any time for discussion. I just wanted to reflect you on the issues which came up clearly from the panel. An idea of a project which would look and what was our title. I think one element could be added there in light of today's discussion in the plenary, and that is the question of trade barriers. What is the significance of free trade to all these scenarios and all these what we saw there? But I wanted to just to have one word for Yuri, because there were so many things. If you have half a minute to say on these views which were expressed, because they are very, very relevant in light of the Russian estimate and assessment of the situation. So Yuri, please go. Can you?
Just a few words. So thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. It was really very interesting. So thank you, my colleague from Japan, concerning such an analysis for the future of the container shipping in the Arctic. We will also study this question. Of course, it was very interesting for us. The idea was that we'll have 2 hubs, for example, one on Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, one on Murmansk. They will work the Arctic containers, and then the liner containers with the ice class, Arctic ice classes, and the feeder containers will then put these containers and to the Southeastern Asia, or for then to Europe. That was one of the models. There was a lot of calculation, there were a lot of disputes. But after all, when now we have the new container vessels with up to 22,000 TEUs capacity, so the price after all seems to be much more cheaper on this 22,000 container. So maybe there might be some new exploration of this question, some more study, maybe. But to the moment, it seems that after all, thank you to my colleague from Alaska, the ice will be in the Northern Sea Route. It will be there. And anyhow, to sail via the Northern Sea Route, you need the ice sea class vessel. And mostly part of the year you'll need the icebreaker assistance. So that's why every time the ship owners, they have to make the decision, because we are well understood that the vessel with ice class, with high ice class, it's much more expensive with the vessel with low ice class or without ice class at all. For example, for this LNG project in Sabetta, these LPG carriers, they were built just for this project. All economy of these gas carriers was calculated for the project with known volume of the cargo to be transported, with a known period of the to be transported, and so on. And so that's why it was chosen, the quantity, how much vessels we need, of which class they must be, just to make all this volume to be transported, and then the economy is works. And this is what I want to say to all ship owners. The economy can work, but it's necessary all the time to calculate, and to calculate very and very carefully, because once again, it's North Road, it's Arctic. The ice will be there. The weather conditions are really severe. But from the Russian Federation, I can say that we are doing now and will doing in future everything just to do the Northern Sea Road safety. And so what I want to say, welcome to the Northern Sea Road. We'll try to bring